The next panel is on kind of the next step of this modernization process. It's called Bigger, Practical Guidance on Scaling Security Programs. So we'll have it moderated by Steve Pruskowski, the ST&E federal lead at CISA, and we'll be hearing from leaders from NRC, DOT, and OpenText Cybersecurity. So we'll give them a minute to come on stage and refresh your copies. And for those of you standing in the back, there's some seats up here. Don't be shy.
Good to see you. Everything good? I guess I should take that in.
Yep.
I can sit it.
Oh, you want to sit there?
All right, if you can take your seats, we're going to go ahead and get started. And please help me welcome Steve Pruskowski from CISA, who will kick off the session.
I guess we're ready. So this session is about practical guidance on scaling security programs, and with me I have Tom Littleton from DOT, who's the DOT exec for Transportation Cyber Coordination, Kevin Green, who is the CTO Public Sector for OpenText Cybersecurity, and John Furbus, the CISO from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So to start off the panel, the first question is, how do we prioritize scaling security programs so that we can effectively manage our cyber risks? So I'll start with you, Tom.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. You know, I think that one of the first things you have to do when you think about how is it that you're going to scale your security programs is you have to look at the maturity of the organization, which is no surprise to anybody in this audience. But the thing that I would throw out that I think gets overlooked is that you have to look at the maturity of your executive leadership, not just maturity like maturity, but cyber maturity. And you know, the thing is that the majority of people who you're going to have running your organizations are well-versed in risk management, but it's maybe a more traditional view of it. They look at financial risk, they look at you know, talent management risk, they look at safety risk. And I think that we're just now hitting the stride where my peer generation of executives look around and they are starting to recognize that cyber risk is business risk. So that's really a foundation there, since all direction inside an organization is most effective when it comes from a top-down approach. I really think that you have to look at the maturity, cyber maturity of the executive leadership and see and educate them to make sure that they understand that cyber risk equals business risk, enterprise risk.
And on the program side, you need to worry about getting all of your tools, getting all of your policy enforcement out to everyone who's doing their own development or has their own business need. So coming with free stuff, coming with data, coming with tools, coming with services is a big thing. And that will help convert a lot of executives as well, because it helps them get off of that budget train for a little bit.
And Tom, I'll probably pass this over to John, with you being the CISO. How do you help educate your executives when things are seeming normal, nothing's happening, and it builds compliance?
You know, it's a lot like being Pepco. You're paying a lot of money, and then if something goes wrong, it's how could this possibly happen? And if nothing goes wrong, it's why am I paying this money? So coming with data, again, is a huge thing. People need to understand what it is we're protecting against, what we have to do as we bring new business processes online, what we have to do with every data source that we've got to ensure that it is that authoritative data, that it can be used appropriately, that it's not being routed to the wrong places or changed by the wrong people. So it's a lot of discussion and a lot of dashboarding to show folks where we are successful and what their money is getting them.
For me, it's really about making the right investments and being informed about that. And I think given the current battlefield we're on from a cyber perspective, I think it's very, very important to kind of understand, you know, how organizations or how the missions are being attacked, leverage and codify, you know, threat intelligence, and be informed about how adversaries understand what your threat profile is. That allows you to implement the right technologies to mitigate threat actors and adversary behaviors and tactics. So to me, when we talk about modernization, you want to modernize, but you also want to make the right investments in technologies that are known to mitigate potential cyber breaches. So I would kind of, use that as a way to kind of, how do we mature our environment? How do we build a cybersecurity program? I think that has to be a key aspect of that. I think it's non-negotiable in today's cyber battlefield. So that's the approach I would like for organizations to take. About 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk at ATARC about zeroing in on zero trust, why federal agencies need to take a threat-informed defense approach. And it was really kind of that mindset. We know that there's over 1,000 security controls as part of the 853 catalog, but not all security controls are created equally. So how do you kind of prioritize the ones that are known to mitigate threat actors and build that and use that as the impetus, the fundamental building block to build out and mature your overall cyber program?
And so it's going back to like the executive education. How do we show our executives that your investment is worthwhile, like key performance indicators on how this is what we've stopped today, this is what we've stopped last week, this is why your investment is why your investment in cybersecurity and training and hiring those professionals to prevent the next cyber attack. How do we show this is how that investment is?
Well, I tell you, that's really one of the hardest things, right? I mean, with any kind of risk that you have to deal with in an organization, you have a crisis, it becomes important. Resources get committed, policy is changed, money is invested, you hire people, and then things get better, right? That thing gets fixed. And over time, other things become a higher risk, more priorities, and it's very easy to lose track of something and allow that to, the resources to be withdrawn, the attention to be taken away from it. And I think that a good parallel that you can draw for your executive leadership is to look at how safety culture has changed in the last 25 or 30 years. If you rewind back to the mid-90s and you said, does your organization have safety? You'd hear things like, well, yes, all of our employees wear steel-toed boots and have safety glasses. We have safety. And now we recognize that safety is a cultural thing, right? It's not something that you can just check off on the box. It's something that you have to have as a part of your daily way that you execute your operations. And so I think you have to start changing that culture so that people see cyber in the same way, cyber safety, like that. And then the other thing too that I think you can do to help keep it at the front of the discussion is to show what's going on in the industry. If nothing's happened, it's easy for it to slip out of the mind, but show examples of things that are going on. Other people who have had a cyber incident or have had an IT problem that they were trying to solve in the cybersecurity realm, and continue to follow up on that. Not just sitting there saying there was a threat and there was an attack, but talking about what happened, how did they mitigate it, what were the long-term impacts, and continuing to revisit that. It helps keep the executives focused on the fact that this is part of my business risk and I need to always be vigilant.
And the good thing in that realm is a lot of our executives are already talking about risk. So if we have an acceptable level of risk, we realize we can't protect against every possible cyber risk. So what's an acceptable loss? What's an acceptable incursion is a good discussion to have. Of course, if you have any loss or any incursion, there's always repercussions. But at least getting folks to understand, we realize that there's a battlefield out there. We realize that things are going to happen, but what's the most important things we can protect against? What's something that we could stand a little bit of service interruption? What's a situation where we could accept a little data loss? Makes it a bit more of a trade-off dialogue between this is what we could do to protect against everything, we can't afford it, so let's not even go there. This is what we can do to protect against the risk that we see today.
So, John, that's looking at like how do we approach our executives with our strategy? How do we build those decision-making processes for them to accept how to determine what acceptable risk is? Do you have any of you have any recommendations on how to help build that strategy? Like what would be like your number one priority on how to increase your cybersecurity posture at your agencies or your companies?
So we start with, there are millions of mandates out there. They will keep coming, they will not stop. There is supply chain risk, there is information risk, there is system risk. There's availability, confidentiality, and integrity risk that 853 is helping us protect against. So we have to build those matrices. We understand what our high value assets are. We can't do the mission without these systems or this information. We understand, hey, if we don't have payroll data for 30 days, we can still pay people and we can fix, annual leave and other things later, or what we're billing our licensees. So we can draw a distinction between those two. And then we start tiering our systems. These are the most important. These come next. These come next. And that's a better discussion to have because you're bucketizing things.
I want to go back to the previous question, and I think I agree with Thomas. I think culture becomes very important. I remember interviewing Dr. Diana Burley on my podcast when I used to do my podcast, and we talked about people resist change, and I think fundamentally we have to shift that culture because security becomes everyone's responsibility. Just think about how software is today. Software is ubiquitous, right? And we all become targets depending on what mission we're supporting in various organizations. So while I'm using my own home computer, I can be a target. The adversaries are very, very skilled. They're very, very highly motivated. And I do think that we have to understand that it's just not the enterprise environment that is under attack, it's the individual, right? And I can specifically have campaigns of high-profile individuals. We talk about high-profile assets, but high-profile individuals who have access to sensitive information, right? Who has access to important information that is very critical and is part of the lifeline of that mission. And that person can be targeted. So for me, culture is very important, and trying to get people to shift and be more nimble, right? Because the threat actors, the adversaries are very shifty in terms of how they approach their different campaigns. But providing that education where cyber is everyone's responsibility. And no matter where you're at home or where you're at work, I think there's a certain level of responsibility, certain level of awareness that you must have to not only protect your own personal lives, but also understand that you have to protect the mission at all costs.
Yeah, and Kevin, to add on to that more, moving into the next topic on it is, you spoke about culture change and education, and how does that role of education play into our workforce? Not just our cyber workforce, but how do we start educating our workforces to understand that security is everyone's responsibility, and not just the same old computer-based training where I'm taking the same training over and over again every year, it's not changing. What would you recommend on how to improve those?
I think that's tough. I think, I've been at S&T, I worked at S&T for about six years, and we support a lot of educational programs with NIST, and I'm not sure any of them really work, right? We've actually seen the payoff. So, I'm kind of stuck on that particular question because I'm not sure those work. But however, I will say that one of my mindsets today is that things that don't work, we need to move off that. And I think that failing fast is very important. Try new things and fail fast, right? But I do think it also starts at very early ages and changing our educational system to a certain extent to have people to focus more on critical thinking, problem solving. Because what is happening is the cyber adversary is painting outside the box. We're still inside the box. So trying to figure out how do we get our folks, our employees, our workforce to start thinking outside the box and use their intuition, right? There's so many things that we know and understand about things about breaking, fixing, building software systems that we have to apply that intuition in terms of how we go about understanding this problem. I never forget, I was watching an interview, it was a Microsoft interview, and they had this known bug bounty guy there, and they asked him, and he was in a hacking contest, a bug bounty contest, and they asked him, how did you exploit this vulnerability? He said he used his intuition. He used his ability to recall things from building and fixing and breaking software, and he codified that and applied that to the particular challenge. So I do think there's so many things that we have to kind of understand and level set and really build the understanding at a very early age to get folks to think outside the box and use their creativity and mindset.
You know, that's a very hard thing to do too in the federal workforce, because unlike a private business where, you know, you have to be agile to survive, the federal government's not particularly agile in the way that it's constructed, right? And any given federal employee has a set of rules that they have to follow. There are statutes that say what you're allowed to do, the programs you work, who they are allowed to apply to, the money you have, what it can be spent on. And so, you know, as people progress through the federal workforce in their careers, it's very easy to lose that ability to think creatively, to think outside the box, because you do have so many guardrails around what you do. I think that's absolutely gets back to the culture thing, that you have to start to encourage that and not, you know, not punish people for trying to find if they can push the corners of the envelope a little bit.
And turning back to the education piece a little bit more of our workforces of, should we start modernizing our training, be more focused on the individual's role, or like in the GS scale, like your series, like this is how cybersecurity or cyber risk applies to you and what the impact is to your daily job, and how do you address this, or why is it important to me? So,
The challenge I see with the role-based training approach is it's kind of just-in-time training. And we need people thinking more broadly about cybersecurity before they become a core, before they become an acquisition specialist. So we need to broaden the type of education and awareness activities we do with folks so that they're not thinking about, as you said, this is what I'm allowed to do today. And they need to start building those mental muscles that, okay, I can give Netflix my credit card information, but I shouldn't give them my social security number. I have to give my phone company my social security number so they can trust me to give me service and do a credit check on me. Same thing when I buy a house. If you're sitting in your office thinking, okay, FAR allows me to do this and only this, so I'll type in and fill in the box and do my CSAM review, that's a little limited. And when they move to the next responsibility, making a mistake there is a little too late to do the education.
I always say that, you know, one of my favorite sayings is that you can't create nothing that you cannot see with your imagination. And the reason why I say that is we have to start thinking about the art of the possible, right? And kind of press the limits on terms of how we see the problem set and how we see adversaries trying to attack us, right? And explore that and use gamification and other modules to kind of expand and seed our imagination to see things above what our limitations is with the guardrails that we have in place from a work environment, and just being conditioned to think a certain way about cyber. I think, you know, having someone to be able to really think intelligently and think without having limits around and those constructs about cyber and how adversaries are trying to attack us, I think the art of possible becomes very important, and really kind of seeing something as possible, right? And seeing that, you know, that adversaries are always, right? They only really have to succeed one time, right? We've always are on the defensive side, and I think, you know, part of what we have to do is be more proactive in terms of how we plan, design, and even monitor and operate our technologies, our technology stacks, our environments from an operational standpoint. So that's one of the things I kind of wanted to, you know, get folks to understanding is that, you know, think outside the box and allow your imagination to run wild. But the other thing is we have to have things that can reinforce those things. So you talk about cyber security awareness training. They're just in time, right? Maybe we need to change and have more gamification around cyber as part of the awareness process, so that we can seed these things into the lexicon of individuals, so we can kind of be more forward thinking and forward leaning in terms of how we address cyber.
I also think that accountability has to play a role in this. You know, how many executives or managers or even rank and file employees have something in their performance plan that addresses cybersecurity? You know, there's the old joke that if you don't measure it, nobody pays attention to it. And if you put a metric in there, That's a valuable tool for helping build a culture in your employee force. The other thing too, and I will draw on an example from safety, is a number of years back I had the opportunity to help put safety into the public transportation systems in the United States. And one of the things that we saw a lot of pushback from employee organizations was, well, if I report a safety thing, I'm going to get in trouble for it. If I did something wrong, it'll be seen as my fault as opposed to a learning point. And the thing that we would always explain is guess what? These safety issues are happening already. You just don't know about them as leadership. And if you don't know about them as leadership, you don't have the ability to find a way to fix them or to make things better. And I think the same lesson can apply to cybersecurity, that while we hold people accountable in our organizations, and we do phishing exercises and stuff to identify trends, we need to make sure that we're not using that as a punitive instrument against people, but rather as an organizational tool that we can find out what's going on, because if we don't know where the problems lie, we have a much harder time fixing them. So we can't just see cybersecurity as a punitive tool. It also has to be a tool of accountability for the organization.
And so we've talked about our executives, we talked about our workforce. How do we make sure all of our other stakeholders are engaged in our processes and in helping mature the cybersecurity processes? So stakeholders, our vendors, how do we help to facilitate those types of activities so we can stay ahead of the next attack?
Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is contracting, right? We had a very interesting discussion, a group of us this morning. When we look at acquisitions in the government, how good a job are we doing at integrating cybersecurity requirements into those, which is a big one for that. And then also, and this doesn't so much apply to the defense crowd in here, but from the Department of Transportation side of things, we have money that we give out for critical infrastructure recapitalization. Under the bipartisan infrastructure law, the department has something on the order of $1 trillion to hand out. And while about 80% of that is tied up in formula and entitlement grants, which Congress sets rules around, we can't really monkey with the requirements, 20% of $1 trillion is still a lot of money. And those competitive and discretionary grant programs that we give out, we can tie cybersecurity requirements to, and that's something that we're actively working to do. And I think that goes a long way to helping your stakeholders have a good incentive. And I also think that, again, maybe speaking to our sector less than the DoD sector, but when you look at the transportation sector, it encompasses a vast spectrum of cybersecurity maturity. You have some organizations that are large and have absolutely top-notch, top-shelf cybersecurity programs, but then you can drop all the way down to small operators who maybe have 3 or 4 employees, and the cybersecurity expert is also the person who cuts the grass. So you have to be able to leverage what tools you have to help them advance their cybersecurity. The simple things of, do you have a cybersecurity POC? Do you know who you're going to call if there's a cybersecurity program? You're going to call the FBI maybe? Do you have a response plan? And it's easy to go online and download one of many freely available self-assessment tools to understand cybersecurity. So I think when you look at your stakeholder community, you have to look at the tools you have available to encourage them, and again, not make it punitive, but rather give them an opportunity.
Take it back to the cultural discussion we've been having, make it a culture of openness around cybersecurity. Bring me a challenge, bring me a problem, let's discuss it, let's use it as a teachable moment across the enterprise, has been a good way of getting awareness and bringing other people to the front of the conversation. I don't have $1 trillion, I have a couple of lollipops, but I can still reward people for bringing me a problem and helping us figure out how to resolve it at the enterprise level, or at least develop pockets that we can export to the rest of the organization. So you just have to make sure that you award people as you can, that you make examples of the good examples, and you make teachable moments of the bad examples in non-judgmental ways, unless you really have to based on law or statute.
I also think it comes back to being mission focused and making sure everyone understands the mission. So that means evaluating your vendors, right? Sometimes vendors don't always have the experience, have the necessary skills to kind of go where you're trying to go to protect your mission, right? So I think having a process to reassess your vendors and making sure that everyone's on the same page, understanding what is the critical assets that are part of the mission, right? And making sure that vendors are on board with that, and you have a way to assess them on a regular basis. We know that vendors are a part of the attack vector now, right? Vendors is a way to get into to mission capabilities because of the interconnectedness that we have, that we see with IT, right? The convergence with IT, cloud, and so many other different environments. I do think vendors become a critical part because at the end of the day, everyone knows who you're doing business with. So having a clear way to assess that, I think that's important. And like I said, being mission focused and making sure everyone understands what the mission is, what are the critical aspects of the mission. I think that's kind of one of the ways to kind of provide that awareness.
And in closing this panel out, so one of the hardest things one of the things we all have to talk about is our successes and how to do things that we succeeded at. Hardest part for all of us to talk about is the failures, what not to do. So to all three of you, what are things that you've learned through your careers of how not to scale security programs? What should we do differently?
If I walk into a room saying, you're doing it wrong, you'll never get it right because you don't care, folks will not work with me. So if I don't start it out as a partnership discussion,
Right.
I am not going to be successful.
That would be my number one thing too, is you really have to get them on your team, right? Our job as leadership is to communicate a vision and then motivate people to be able to achieve that vision. And it applies too with cybersecurity. I think about the failures, that I've seen. It's usually when you come in with the assumption that everybody understands what you understand and is on board with it. And if you don't take the time to get people on board with you first, you have an uphill battle.
Just share your vision. I think sharing your vision gives others the opportunity to buy into that vision. And I think when you share your vision, people buy in. I think you can kind of get people on the same page, and everyone's walking the same way, right? We can have that cohesiveness to really kind of have the necessary culture that's necessary to kind of deal with some of the challenges that we see, not only just from the cyber perspective, but also from the IT perspective. So I think one of the things I've learned is really trying to bring everybody along. Sometimes people can be a little bit forward leaning. I like to be out there sometimes. So given my background at S&T, I always try to be forward leaning. And sometimes you have to kind of take a step back and kind of share your vision and show people here's how we're going to get there, and allow people to buy into that, but also help instill some level of trust, that people trust what you're going to say, right? And the only way to do that is your experience. You have to be rock steady at what you do. You can't be shaky flaky. You have to be rock steady. Your word is your word, right? And you gotta be able to go to bat for people, and you gotta be able to defend people in a way that allows them to be empowered to do their job, and not to be afraid to make mistakes. I think that's important as well.
And when folks tell you about the wonderful technology they've got at home and how it can work in this situation, listen carefully, thank them, and try and incorporate the broader themes, maybe not the product. It's always a challenge when folks have their own computers at home and think they're experts.
Especially if it's Windows. Oh, my mic is on.
So in closing, do you guys have any other comments that you'd like to make on how to build our programs and make them more effective?
It is a marathon of many sprints. Be prepared for the long haul and be prepared for swapping out technologies. Things will continue to change, probably faster than they've been. We seem to be rolling that technology down the hill.
For me, it's really getting back to the basics, which is basically cyber resiliency. We see a lot of things that are happening from software supply chain to zero trust. It's really about cyber resiliency and really getting back to the basics and making sure that we can deploy technologies that allow us to anticipate, evolve, and adapt our cyber defenses to keep pace, actually, to keep pace with what adversaries are actually doing or trying to do to us. So that would be, the advice. And also, as we modernize, right, are we modernizing in a way that's actually innovative, or are we modernizing in a way just to take a Windows 98 machine out of life cycle, right? So the goal for me is really to understand and make the right investments, and having that threat profile that I discussed at the top is very important. So you're making the right investments in technologies that can help you be resilient to cyber attacks.
I think my last parting advice would be to remember that no one of us is as smart as all of us together. And opportunities to be able to meet with your peers is invaluable. Almost a guarantee, if you look at just the sample size of this room, there's no problem that one of us has that somebody else in this room hasn't already gotten past and worked through. So I would say that we just need to continue to work together as a community, given how fast cybersecurity is maturing around us.
Thanks.
Thank you.